Hello, I'd like to show you a demo of a feature in SD card cloner that allows you to shrink the last Linux file system on an SD card or any kind of media that you're cloning, so that you're able to only clone the used space that's on the file system or on the actual media itself. So let me show you how that works. So I've inserted a SD card into my Mac, and it's an 8 gig SD card. It's a SanDisk, standard 8 gig SD card. And you can see right now it actually has a file system on it. It actually has two. It has a FAT32 file system and a extended file system, extended 2 or 3 file system from Linux. And the two file systems basically take up the entire size of the SD card. So the allocated space with file systems is 7.95 gigabytes. The media size itself, the SD card, it takes up the entire space. So if I took an image of that, the image prior to it being compressed would be 7.95 gigabytes, and I'd have to restore all of those bits to a new SD card. And while SD card cloner can do that in parallel and make it very fast, what we really do to speed up this, and we call this turbo mode for Raspberry Pi or really any kind of SD card that has the extended file system as the last partition. It will allow you to shrink that last partition, only clone and then restore the used bytes, and so you end up having very fast restores because you're only really restoring the bytes that are used. So the way that we do that is we go ahead and I'll select the SD card that I want to be able to shrink that file system, and I'll go down to the gear menu here and select Shrink Last Linux Extended Partition. When I select that, it'll prompt me to make sure that I'm an administrator, and then it'll say, I want to do that, and I'll say OK. And what it will do, what SD card cloner will do, is it will look on the SD card and see is the last partition a Linux extended partition. If it is, it'll do a full disk check on it, and then it'll go and resize the allocated space or resize the file system, that extended Linux partition, so that it only is the size of the used space. And you can see it just completed. The allocated space is 3.62 gigabytes, and the media size is 7.95. The media size would never change because that's the size of the SD card. But one of the kind of amazing things that we've done is just move the size of the file system to just the amount that was used on that in that file system. So now if we create an image of that, the image prior to compression will be 3.62 gigabytes. Which means that any time we restore, we only have to restore 3.5 gigabytes instead of the full 8 gigabytes, which right there you can see it would increase the speed by 2, a factor of 2. We will also, when we create an image of this, compress it so the size on the disk will be significantly smaller than the 8 gigs, and even it'll be significantly smaller than the 3.62 gigabytes. So what we'll have is not very much it'll save some data on saving the image, but then when it restores, it'll actually be really fast as well. So let's go ahead and select this and create an image of it. So I'll click on the SD card under Source and select Save Image. And it'll prompt me, do I want to? And I'll call this SD card image save. Okay, and it'll remind me that we do this it wasn't turbocharged, it was supercharged Raspberry Pi mode, which allows you to do this. It reminds you to do this operation. Since we've already done it, we'll just click continue, and it'll go ahead and create an image of that SD card. As I said before, it's not going to create an image of the entire media, but rather just the allocated space. So I'll let that run, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the image. Okay, it's now completed, and you can see that a new image was created called SD card image save.zip. And so while it was cloning the allocated space, it also was compressing it using the zip compression algorithms to be able to save space on the disk. It still will require a 3.62 gigabyte or larger SD card to restore it to. So you can see that indeed it does have the size of the file system as 3.62 gigabytes, and that number there is so you can see how large of an SD card you would need to be able to restore that image. But one of the interesting things is if you hover over this, it'll actually tell you the size of the disk or the size of the image on disk. There it is. The size of the image is 1.4 gigabytes. So now that means when I put in SD cards, I could restore this to a 4 gigabyte SD card or 8 or 32. I have a lot more flexibility. And one of the key things with SD card cloner is that there's some SD cards that are slightly different sizes. When you get one that's 8 gigabytes, I've actually seen the SanDisk ones we get are 7.95 gigabytes for the media size, whereas the Kingston SD cards are a little bit smaller than that, 7.75. And what that means is that if I tried to create an image of the 7.95 gigabyte SD card and restore it onto the smaller one, even though it's just slightly smaller, it would fail because there's just not enough bytes or space in the disk to be able to store that. But if we shrank it first, you can see it would be very easily fit on even a 4 gigabyte card. It would fit on the 7.75 or 7.95 or 8 gigabyte card. So it allows you to very easily have a lot more flexibility of restoration and speed it up as well. The last operation I'll show you is that since we did shrink the used space on this SD card, we could just restore this image onto this SD card and it would expand it out, or we have an operation where we can just do that directly. So I selected that SD card as the source and I'll choose expand last Linux partition, and it'll warn me, say okay. It'll go ahead and now expand that last Linux partition so that it takes up the remaining space on the media. And so now you can see that the allocated space is 7.95 and the media size is 7.95. As part of the operation, the last operation, it does do a full disk check as well. So thanks very much for watching and seeing how you can shrink the Linux extended partition so that you can have faster restores as well as more flexibility for restoring on different size SD cards. Thanks for watching, and download a free trial at twocanoes.com.